Hello, my name is Steve Daugherty, attorney and CEO of Montana Elder Law. I'm sending this video out to a lot of people who have registered for our workshops in the past and may or may not have been able to attend. So if you were unable to make one of our workshops, I'm including a recently recorded video of a workshop that we presented in 2019. If you did come and you want to see it again, you're welcome to, but if you didn't get to see it, please take a look, and if you did see it, you know someone that could benefit from this material, please share it with them. Thank you. I'd like to begin by telling you a story about a lady named Grace. Grace, she and her husband were farmers, and when Grace was relatively young, she lost her husband to a heart attack. And so she was left with a handful of boys and a bunch of animals and about a section of land to give it a go. They were farmers. And she did a pretty good job. She did a really good job. Never remarried, raised all the boys on her own. But along the way, Grace suffered about every imaginable health issue that you can imagine, including cancer. Being a tough farming lady, she licked them all. But the one thing that Grace could not beat was when Grace was 65, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And if any of you have ever had a family member with severe dementia, you know it's only a matter of time before you need professional help. Just because your loved one doesn't get up and leave at 2 in the morning does not mean that you don't get up and go check, right? So the boys, they did their best to care. They took turns caring for Grace during this time. But it got to the point where they realized they needed professional help. And so they did the only thing they could, and that was they found a loving senior home to place Grace in. And they provided an excellent level of care for the rest of Grace's life. Well, when Grace went into the nursing home, the sons, they never really thought that she would live that long there because of her terrible health history, right? They didn't realize the potential. When someone has dementia, it doesn't mean that the rest of their body is not working fairly well, even though she was ill and sick. So they began paying for her care like most people do, and that was with her savings. But like a lot of farmers and ranchers, Grace was land rich and cash poor, right? Depending on the time of the year. And it did not take long to go through Grace's savings. So then the boys began ponying up, and they began paying for their mother's care out of their own income and out of their own savings. But like a lot of people in this situation, this is what we call the sandwich generation. That is where you have adults that are paying for the care of their parents and the care of their kids. And when you got money going both ways, it doesn't take long to empty the coffers, right? So after a while, they came together and they realized they really only had one option on how they were going to pay for their mother's care, and that was with the only readily available asset to her, and that was with the farmland. So they began paying for Grace's care 80 acres at a time as they began selling off parcels of the farm to the neighbors. Well, Grace went in at age 65, and she passed away just over 10 years later. She passed away at age 75. And when she passed away, that beautiful farm was a house and 20 acres. And if you go there today, it's actually a big subdivision, which is a shame. Now, the reason I know that story so well is Grace was my grandmother, and my father was one of those boys, and I witnessed this growing up. This would have been during my high school years and young adult years that I witnessed all of this. Well, if I had a time machine and I could go back to 1988, I could literally save the family farm. But I don't have a time machine, and I can't help my family, but I can help your family. And that's what I do. My name is Steve Daugherty. and I am the principal and CEO of Montana Elder Law. We are a law firm. We have offices across the state. Our home office is here in Missoula, but we have 6 offices across the state, and I think it's important for you to know that so you'll understand we're not some fly-by-night organization here to sell you a bunch of binders, right? I've been to that show. With us also is Stephen Colas. He is actually the managing attorney. In each of our offices, we have a managing attorney. This is our contact information, address and phone, as well as where we're located. We're located over at the Palmer Professional Park. You guys are probably familiar where all the state offices are and federal offices are. That is our door. If you ever need to get a hold of us, that is our door. You walk in right there and you'll run into us. But why are we here? Let me tell you a little bit about my background and how I got to this. My background is as an estate lawyer. And more specifically, for years, I worked with small business owners and high net worth individuals. And what I did is I helped protect people's personal assets from their professional liability. What does that mean? Well, I would use the laws afforded to us to create asset protection strategies. So if the contractor has a bad day at the job site, he still has a home he can come home to at the end of the day. Even if he lost everything in a lawsuit with his business, he would not lose his personal assets. Okay? Same thing if the surgeon operated on the wrong knee, still have a savings account, right? And we have, every law that we have, ladies and gentlemen, is based on some public policy. And so we have these asset laws that are available to us to protect America's largest employer. Do we know who that is? Small business owners, right? So we want to provide some levels of protection for small business owners, or else no one would go into business if the risk was so great of losing everything. So we have laws that allow asset protection so that you might lose all of your business interest in a horrific lawsuit, right? But you're not going to lose your home, all right? And so that's what I did for years, was to help people, whether we were using LLCs or corporations or trusts or limited family partnerships or different types of tools, that I would kind of build firewalls and help people protect their home and life savings. Well, I started getting a call that was very similar 3 or 4 years ago, and the call would go something like this. Steve, I'm not a multimillionaire, but I got a house that's paid for, and my husband and I, we just retired. And I'm afraid if one of us gets sick, the other one will have to sell the house to pay for the sick spouse's care. And we'll have to move in with the kids, right? I never could tell what they thought was worse, having to go into a nursing home or moving in with the kids. Either situation is a dire crisis, right? So people would call and ask me, is there anything I can do just to protect my home and my savings from nursing home costs? And my answer was invariably, yes, there are. There's laws that allow you to protect your assets, but if this is done incorrectly, it will be worse than doing nothing at all. Okay? And so I began helping one family at a time just here in Missoula, but word spread. And so I wasn't dealing with multimillionaires, just someone who has a $250,000 house that's paid for, and they want to make sure that the house goes to the kids, not the nursing home. Well, as you can imagine, there's a lot more people that are 65 with a house that's paid for than there are people worth tens of millions of dollars. So my practice became overrun with so many people calling up wanting what Betty and John, what they came to see me about. Well, within a year, my entire practice was focused on nothing but that. We call this area of law elder law. So what is elder law? Elder law is estate planning, but with one eye kind of on nursing home costs. Okay, people ask me, what do? I help families that are stressed out about nursing home costs. So that's kind of elder law. It's estate planning with people who have concerns for long-term health care costs, right? What is your single greatest financial threat? Anybody?
Medical bills.
Medical bills. Medical bills. And more specifically, long-term health care costs. Last year, 60% of the people who filed bankruptcy attributed health care costs is one of the leading contributing factors for that. See, I'm no statistician, but I'm pretty sure very close to 100% of us are going to die. And some of us are going to be sick for a little period of time prior. And so one of the jobs that Stephan and I and our other attorneys do is we get families to acknowledge this. And in our culture, this has kind of become a taboo subject. Other cultures, it's not so taboo, you know. And I kind of get it. You know, parents, they don't want to bring it up or address their own mortality or make the kids believe they're about to die. And the kids don't want to come across as gold diggers, so nobody talks about these things. And burying your head in the sand is not a plan. So what I want to do is I want to encourage families to have this conversation and talk about it. And like a lot of things, once you look under the bed and you see there's no monster there, there's no reason to be afraid of what's under the bed, right? Whenever you have a big issue and it's weighing heavily on you, if you address it, typically it's nothing as bad as you made it out to be. And once you have done that, you feel better and you can move on to something else that we humans stress about. So we can quit worrying about, well, what happens if we get old and sick? And you can then focus your attention on the neighbors who built the fence on your property line. Move on to something else, and you don't have to worry about this. So with what I'm doing with a lot of people is I'm creating an estate plan, but I'm also creating an asset protection plan that I hope they never need. Because if they need it, they're in a nursing home. Okay? But we also help families who already have a loved one that's already there or facing it, and they're trying to figure out, how in the world am I going to pay for it? And we're going to cover that tonight. But your single greatest financial threat is not getting sued. Now, when I was dealing with my high net worth people, they were concerned with that because they had enough money to pay for nursing home costs. But what would wipe them out was a $10 million lawsuit, right? For 99.5% of the rest of America, is simply getting old and getting ill and trying to deal with these exorbitant costs. But the good news is that there's strategies that you can use. It's just very few people have ever heard of them. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I call it a financial crisis. These are average numbers. For assisted living in Montana, the average cost, and this data is actually a couple of years old, $42,000 on average. This is in Montana as average. That's your starting costs. If you need extra bells and whistles, it's going to go up, right? For what we consider traditional long-term care, we call that skilled nursing care. The number more than doubles to $90,000 a year on average. Over 100 is not unusual. This is average. And whenever a family starts to try to pay for nursing home costs, there's all these hidden costs that you learn about. For instance, when my family began selling off farmland, they say, all right, we're going to sell off $100,000 of farmland to pay for, at that time, probably a couple of years of care. What happens? You sell the land, you got to pay capital gains taxes. You got to pay closing costs. For a lot of our clients, they think, well, we'll tap into Dad's retirement accounts to pay for his care. Well, guess what happens when you pull out your money from your 401k or IRA? You got to pay with the deferred taxes. So when we start doing this, there's always less assets. That's been my experience than we thought. Unless it's a CD at the bank, you're going to have less than what you thought. And here's the other sad thing is I see families who they have to sell an asset that produces income. Let's say that they have a rental house. You have a married couple. Husband gets sick. Wife sells the rental house. Well, guess what? All of our attention is on the sick spouse. And all too often we neglect to pay our attention to the well spouse. Because now what's mom going to live off? What happened to her income when we butchered the goose that lays the golden egg, in this case her rental house, right? Now she's left with savings and Social Security. So a lot of times when we go to start paying for this, you see the assets start cannibalizing themselves real quickly. You start cutting off the income for the well spouse. You start paying all the taxes and everything. And all these hidden costs, it turns out it always adds up to a lot more than what people expected. And here's the other thing. You know, I was telling you about my dad and my uncles who were paying for this care. Well, in today's dollars, if you have 3 or 4 kids that are going to try to pay for mom's $90,000 a year care, they got to go make about $120, right? Because you got to pay the taxes. You got to go make your make your money, and you got your withholding taxes. We have 2 seats over here if you're looking for 2 together. There's 2 more. Thank you. So whenever you start paying for these care, you always find out that you don't have as many assets as you thought you had, because you get killed on the taxes and transaction costs. Don't worry about reading that last one. That's a lot of words and they're small print. I'll tell you what it says. The cost of health care is rising at a steeper rate than the rate of inflation. So what that means is your health care dollar today buys less health care next year. Our dollars are being eroded by inflation because health care is going up so steep. Average length of stay in a nursing home. You know, we hear a lot of statistics. Here's the real numbers, folks. About 12% of the people who go into a nursing home are in for less than 3 months. 3 months to a year, 24%. 1 year to 3 years, 32%. 3 to 5 years, 14%. And here's a scary one. 5+ years, 18%. Almost 1 in 5 people who go into a nursing home now live there for over 5 years. So we use today's dollars, that's $500,000, isn't it? Ouch. So, and another way to look at this, if you do it, it really divides out into thirds. You could say this 12 plus 24, that's almost a third. So that's people who go in for 1 year or less is only about a third. For those who are in for 1 to 3 years, it's about another third. And then if you take 14 and 18, that's the same number as here. 3+ years is about a third. So about 1/3 of the nursing home residents are in for 3+ years. Now the reason that is important is when I'm doing asset protection for a family, I'm not too concerned about a family member who goes in for 3 months. I mean, I don't want anyone going in for 3 months. I don't want anybody going in this room going into a nursing home, especially the guy standing up, walking around talking. But if I have a client who has a family member who goes in for 3 months, we're talking about losing less than $30,000 probably. Maybe that wipes them out. If it does wipe them out, they didn't have a ton to lose. So it's not a huge catastrophe. Again, you got to see this through my perspective. I'm trying to think about protecting assets. I'm more concerned with the families who are in for 3+ years, because now we're talking about that's enough to wipe out the house. That's enough to wipe out everything. So that's your single greatest financial threat. I was shocked to read in the paper here a month or so back that the average home in Missoula, did anybody see that, what the average home sells for now in Missoula? It was over $300,000. Hey, when I grew up, that was where the millionaires lived, was in a $300,000 house. Now that's average. So if you have a house that's paid for, particularly if you look down the road 10, 20 years, that's a substantial amount that can be lost, right? So that's what I'm concerned about, is the people who are in for several years, not the families that are in for a few months. I was doing this workshop up in Kalispell recently. A lady comes up at the end and she was saying, well, my mom has been in the nursing home for 14 years. Yeah, and folks, that's not that unusual. They can keep us alive a long time now. And speaking of that, we're all living longer. You guys know what the average life expectancy for Americans was in 1935 when they passed the Social Security Act? 67. So Social Security kicked in at 65, designed to prop us up for 2 years. A better statistic is, in terms of when we're doing planning like this, is to say, what is the average mortality rate for people who die of natural causes? Because I think the average numbers today are like 76, 77, 78 years for the average American lifespan. But ladies and gentlemen, that number is skewed. It's skewed by all the infant mortality. It's skewed by all the premature deaths, right? So that 76 is pulled way down. A better number is to say, for people who make it to 65, people who make it to 65 are typically going to die from a natural cause, not a skateboarding accident, right? And so the statistics, it tells us if we make it to 65, that in 2017, the average lifespan for Americans was 86.5 for men, almost 89 for ladies. So instead of 60, so that's one of the reasons our Social Security Trust Fund is a little bit in trouble, because it was designed to last for 2 to 3 years for people instead of 20-something years. But folks, 88 is that's an average number. We know it's nothing for people to live well in their 90s now, right? This is the average number. Hey, I got several clients over 100. One of them on his dullest day is sharper than me on my sharpest day. So, I look at 65's the new 35, right? We're all living in our 90s, but so we have these increasing long-term care costs, and we're having a longer period of time where we're going to potentially face that, okay? Who will need care? There's a lot of scary statistics out there, but I want you to focus on this last one. The Alzheimer's Foundation of America says 1 in 8 people who are 65 or older will be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Now, the reason this scares me is because I consider Alzheimer's a 10-year hit. And if you want to put some numbers to that, call it $1 million hit. Because even with my grandmother, who had cancer, which she beat, she still lived 10 years in the nursing home. So with Alzheimer's, it's easy. That's the one that really concerns me. Maybe it's a little too close to home, but that's the one that can rack up and absolutely wipe out families, okay? And plus, it's a very sad process. I want to talk about personal finance real quick. I see things as an asset protection lawyer. I see things through a different lens than most people. And when it comes to personal finance, and what I'm talking about is we've all heard the recipes for how to create enough money to have for your retirement years. Whether that's Susie Orman on TV or Dave Ramsey on the radio or the books you read, your financial advisor, your CPA, they're going to tell you a similar recipe. And I've always viewed personal finance and retirement savings as you got an offense and you have a defense. But all we ever hear about is the offense. The offense goes something like this. Make consistent earnings through your working years. Pay yourself first. You ever heard that? Out of your paycheck, put the first 10% or whatever is appropriate for your family, put that away, live off the rest. Hire a prudent accountant so you're paying no more in taxes than you're legally obligated to do so. And then finally, whatever you have left, you want to invest in a diversified portfolio so all your assets aren't in one basket. Also, we don't want it all in savings, because if it's all in savings, we're losing money to inflation, right? So the recipe's fairly simple. You just got to do it for 30 years or longer. But if we do all of that, let's represent that with a castle. And over the years, I've probably seen close to 1,000 castles in terms of people come in and they show me what they own, tell me what their plans are and all of that. And I've seen castles that are multiple stories or just a modest one story. For me, it doesn't matter how many zeros are at the end of the net worth. If it's 100% yours, that's what we're trying to protect. But if you've done all of this, you will have your castle. Now, this castle would also include, if you're fortunate enough that you got that would include a debt-free home, maybe debt-free period. It'll also include your Social Security income. And so if you've done all of this for years and you're debt-free or very close to it, and you add your Social Security in there, you're going to have more money than you're going to need through retirement if you just, keep an eye on your spending. So this is what we're told. This is the key to financial success right here. But there's a problem. Let's let that represent your offense, because this is what generates dollars for you to buy groceries with during your retirement years. So I see a lot of good offenses. The problem that I see with 99% of the clients who have come in is they have no defense. It doesn't matter how nice your castle is, you got to have a moat. Because ladies and gentlemen, if you don't have a moat, and you can do all of this for 30, 40 years, and it can all be gone in 4 or 5 years in the nursing home. You can be completely wiped out. So I think it's very important. You got to have a defense. So we got to have an offense, and we got to have a defense, right? So how do you dig a moat? How do you dig a moat? There's three areas for asset protection I want you to think about. The first one is insurance. I'm a big believer in insurance. If the mayhem guy from the Allstate commercial shows up, and you have enough of this insurance right here, your financial problems will go away. Your financial problems. If your house burns or you're in a car wreck and it's your fault, someone's injured on your property, your fault, and if you are sued, if you have enough of this, then the financial problem goes away. So err on the side of having maybe a little more insurance than you think you need. If you think you're paying maybe a little more in insurance than you need, consider that an investment in your sleeping habits. So I've yet to have a client run into a serious crisis, financial crisis, and call me up and say, Steve, I don't know what to do with all the insurance money. It's usually the other way around. Okay? So first line of defense, think of it in terms of asset protection, is always insurance. Business entities. Now, number one, this first one, insurance will apply to 98% of you, if not more. This right here will apply to about a third of you. And you're like, well, Steve, I don't own a business. Why do I'm interested in that? Well, you may not need a business entity, but let me explain how we use business entities for people that it makes sense for. Well, let's say that you have a rental house here in town, and you have that rental house in your name. So he's got a $300,000, just an average home in Missoula, an average $300,000 house that you rent out. And you rent out to some college kids, college guys at that. And on tomorrow night,
we've done all this.
Yeah. And I use these examples because it's what my clients experience. Okay. But in this case, he has a rental house. He's got a couple of guys that are renting it out, going to school, and on Friday night, one of them tries to impress a co-ed, and he ends up at the bottom of the stairs with a severed spine. And he's got outrageous medical costs, so he hires a lawyer. And the lawyer says, well, let's look into the house. Because it's not just the medical costs, folks. The big number will be a lifetime's diminished earnings. Most likely that number will be larger than the medical costs that are not covered. So during the lawyer's due diligence, if they find out that your handrail is not up to code or missing completely, you got a problem. As a matter of fact, you got a big problem if the young man can't work for the next 40 years. So what are they going to do? They're going to sue the owner of the house and try to get some assets to try to pay off the bills and make this young man whole. Okay? Well, if the owner of the rental house is you, sir, if it's in your personal name, that means that they're going to come after everything you own, not just the rental house, but everything else. Because what's going to happen is, in that case, let's say that you got the best attorney here in the state is representing you, and you had a great day in court. And when you leave there, you only owe $2 million. Well, if you have $500,000 of liability coverage on your rental house, and the insurance company's going to write a check for $500,000, and then the plaintiff, in this case, they're going to get a deficiency judgment against you for $1.5 million. That's how it works. All right. What if you came to my workshop last year and you hired Stephen to create just a very simple LLC? So your rental house is over there on Johnson Street, and so Stephen creates Johnson Street LLC, and we deed that house, that rental house, out of your personal name, and we put it in Johnson Street LLC. Now the owner of the property is Johnson Street LLC. Guess what the only asset Johnson Street LLC owns? Rental house. So same scenario occurs. They sue the owner of the property. If this is done correctly, that lawsuit will end at the four corners of that lot. So the LLC, limited liability company, we have limited the liability of your professional activity, in this case, owning a rental house, from your personal assets. And the same thing, you say, well, Steve, I don't have a lot of assets. I said, well, do you have a part-time business? Well, I do tax prep in the spring. I do a little bookkeeping on the side. If you're handling someone else's money, you're at a high risk of getting sued. Dealing with someone's money, kids, or pets, you might want to think about whether or not an LLC makes sense. And if you've got 6 rental houses, it might make sense to put each one in a separate LLC. So if you get a lawsuit on one of them, you don't have a domino effect on all the others, right? And that's what I mean by building firewalls between your assets. So if you lose, just like on a ship, right? If you lose one, it doesn't take down everything else. There's a third way to build a moat. It's with a proper estate plan. And when we do an estate plan, it can provide protection for 2 classes of people. Okay? The first class is our heirs, and for simplicity, we'll just say your kids, because for most people, that's their kids, but it may not. You may not have children. Your children may be high earners, and maybe you just want to leave it to the church or the grandkids, or maybe you don't like your kids. I can give you the name of my child if that's the case. But my point is, we can provide protection for your heirs with an estate plan. Now, why would we want to? How would we do that? What would that look like? Well, let's say that when you pass away, you have your house that's paid for. Maybe you got a little insurance. Maybe you got a few coins in the bank. If your house is paid for when you pass away, that could easily come to $500,000. I mean, we don't think about it. Well, Steve, I got $10,000 in the bank. Well, yeah, you got $300,000 of equity. You've got a $50,000 life insurance policy, and you got 17 implements for your tractor. So I've never done an estate sale where we ended up getting less than what the family thought. So it's not that, believe it or not, it's not hard to get to $500,000 anymore if there is a house involved. So let's say that you're in that situation and you have one child, and you and your spouse, or if you're single, just you pass away, that child's going to inherit $500,000. Well, that's a substantial inheritance, isn't it? I'm not too concerned about the child unless it's a young child. Like when I'm doing planning for young adults, meaning adults with minor children, the big thing here is what happens to you, how are the kids going to get raised, and how do we make sure they don't get your $1 million term life insurance policy paid out to them when they turn 18. Because if I would have got $1 million at 18, I would have probably killed myself, why? Because I'm a human. And I hadn't had a chance to develop any financial literacy or one nugget of wisdom yet, right? So it's never a good idea for the young kids to get enough to hurt them, because I've seen inheritances be both blessings and curses. You may have agreed. There's been times I saw that I thought that the kid, even though the kid was 58, would have been better off to get nothing because what it attracted. Okay? But back to this scenario, you have $500,000 and you die, and you leave it to one child, and this child is more responsible than you could ever hope to be personally. But if that child 2 years later goes through a divorce, what happens to that $500,000 of inheritance? Folks, divorce is a negotiation. You can hire an attorney and you can fight for that and say, that's my inheritance. But what's left after the attorney inherits, right? So most divorces are a negotiation. And that $500,000 could very quickly turn into $250,000. What if that daughter is driving down Reserve Street, gets a text, looks down at it, unlike any of us would ever do, looks back up, and takes out a van full of trial lawyers? What's going to happen to that $500,000 inheritance? It's gone. If it was her fault, right? We live in a litigious society, depending on the insurance and a bunch of other things. I'm just illustrating a couple of points on how quickly your lifetime savings could be gone. And what's even worse is we're talking about money going to the ex-son-in-law and trial lawyers. I mean, it would be different if it defaulted to your sibling or the church. But now I'm talking about it going to the ex-in-law, which we call outlaws, right? We don't want any money going to the outlaws, which some of you might include the trial lawyers. So what we might do is, instead of leaving things outright with a will, is we might use a trust. Because that $500,000 can sure go to a lot better uses if we stretch that inheritance out over a 10-year period, or longer, depending on the age of the child and what the situation is. Sometimes we have 3 children, and let's say we have $600,000 and 3 children. Each gets $200,000. Most times that's not a big deal, because they'll take that and they'll pay off their debt, hopefully, and move on. But what if one of those 3 children has been successfully sober for 3 years? Do we want that child, regardless of age, inheriting $200,000? Maybe it will be harmless, or maybe it's going to wreck their life, which we want to be boring and predictable. Okay? For that person that has learned all the hard lessons, we don't want any big changes in that person's life, do we? We don't want an inheritance to be viewed as a substitute for doing things the right way. And I talk to parents with younger children. If you leave too much money too soon to your kids, are they going to achieve their goals and dreams? I don't know. It's kind of hard to work late on a Friday if you got $500,000 in savings and you're 25. All right? So we can, by no fault of the child, we can remove their ability to become who they want to be. And I'm not trying to overprescribe the medication and say, hey, everybody needs a trust. But my point is, I'm trying to let you understand that maybe that child would be better to get $2,000 a month until the money's all gone. Or, if it's depending on the child's age, for a younger child, maybe we want them to get it when they're 25, 30, 35, and 40, so they can get some practice at inheriting instead of just one bite at the apple. So there's ways to do that, and you do it with a trust, and you can set it up however you want, right? My child inherits only if they don't marry this person. And I've seen that. Because they knew where the money would go if they married this person, right? I'm all for supporting our local businesses, but I don't want to see the inheritance to end up at Lucky Lil's. Certainly not all of it, right?
Oh, hindsight.
So we might use a trust to protect the inheritance from creditors, predators, and perhaps some regretful spending decisions. So that's the first class of people we can protect with an estate plan. If the sun is bothering anybody's eyes, which is nice to have the sun after this past week, let me know. Or if you want to help yourself to close the curtains, by all means, feel free to do so. There's a second class of people that we can help with an estate plan. A far more important class of people. You. So, how can we use an estate plan to protect, for protection for you? Well, what is your single greatest financial threat?
Me.
Pardon?
Me, myself.
You yourself. Well,
I need adult supervision.
You need adult supervision. I think all of us do at times. But since you came in late, you didn't see slide number 2. The correct answer is medical costs or long-term care costs. So how can we use we can use an estate plan. I can craft one that will protect you from you.
It's a good plan.
But you're gonna need a full-time caddy. All right. But what I'm talking about, folks, is maybe taking some of your assets, not all, maybe just your house, and protecting that, putting a protective wrapper around it, so in the event that you or your spouse ends up in a nursing home, God forbid, that you won't have to sell the house. If you have enough cash that you're like, well, I've saved more than I'll ever spend, perhaps we might move some cash, some of the money accounts in there. But for most people, by and large, if I can protect the house and just the house, I've protected the vast majority of the family's net worth for most people. So a lot of time, and real estate is so easy to protect. It takes some seasoning, and we'll discuss this shortly. But see, if you put your house in there, your house is not a commercial activity. There's nothing going on. There's not money coming in and going out in terms of like your retirement account or your investment account. So real estate's kind of a no-brainer. And for most people, if I can protect their home, I've protected the vast majority of their assets. And so far as the cash, I hope you spend it and have fun with it, right? But for some people, they have enough that we want to protect their cash also. All right. If you have a loved one that goes into a nursing home, you have 4 ways that you can pay for this. You have 4 options. There's 4 doors. First door, fairly simple. Personal savings, and that's what gets depleted first. Number 2, long-term care insurance. I already told you I'm a big believer in insurance, but do you know what the problem with long-term care insurance is?
It's expensive.
Yeah.
And therefore, it results, the question or the answer the gentleman said is it's expensive. And yes, and because it's expensive, the true problem is nobody's got it. If you've got it, I applaud you, but most people don't. Because if you can even qualify, it's expensive, right? It's like, well, this is as much as the nursing home.
Even if you qualify.
And here, and they don't want to pay to qualify. Another problem I see with traditional long-term care insurance is most of the policies I have seen look something like this. We'll pay $100 a day for 2 years, something like that, some variation. Maybe they pay more, maybe the period of time is longer or shorter. What if, so $100 a day is $3,000 a month. We've already established that we need at least $7,500 a month, right? $3,000 a month is very much appreciated, but because that's what it pays, I have always seen traditional long-term care insurance as a supplement to number 1, because very seldom would it ever pay the entire bill. Also, I already established I'm not too concerned about the folks that are in there for a few months. What if you're in there for more than the length of coverage, 18 months or 2 years? See, that's where I start getting concerned. So long-term care insurance, if you got it, good on you. But it usually is just a supplement to number 1. Here's the other problem with traditional long-term care insurance. It's a use it or lose it proposition. What do I mean? Well, let's say you have $100,000 in liquid assets, and you pay $2,000 to the long-term care insurance company. You now have $98,000. So that $2,000 came off your balance sheet, right? Balance sheet, that's the sheet that shows your assets, your liabilities. You subtract the liabilities from the assets, and if you have a positive number, you have a positive net worth, right? So in this case, we had $100,000 in the asset column, and we took 2,000 and we moved it over here, we now got 90. So and then next year you write another check for another $1,000, $2,000. Now you go down to 96 and so forth. So the only way you win that bet is to end up in the nursing home. Now there's a bet I hope to lose, right? So a lot of people psychologically have a problem with traditional long-term care insurance. I don't want to put money into something that the only way I come out ahead is to end up in a nursing home. So a lot of people don't do it. They say, well, I'm just going to self-insure, take my chances, right? Well, that's the shortcomings of traditional long-term care insurance. Now, the good news is in recent years, the industry has changed. And there is a new version of long-term care insurance. If you're remotely interested in this, I want you to look into this type. It's called a hybrid policy. Now, a hybrid policy it's part life insurance, part long-term care insurance. And what the brilliant people that do actuarial statistic analysis is they figured out that they can manage the risk better kind of on a life insurance platform. Anyway, I don't want to get too far out in the weeds, but here's the new generation of long-term care insurance, which I actually kind of like. Because it's not a use it or lose it scenario. With us tonight is Jamie Rendell with New York Life, and I invited, she and her husband Cameron Rendell work a lot with us on this. And so I usually invite Cameron or Jamie to come and help me out so I don't botch up this next. So I'm probably going to lean on you here shortly. The new version, and we work a lot together. One of the products I like best is that Asset Flex you guys have.
Yes.
So the new version, the product that I'm working with a lot of clients on, it's called Asset Flex. You just ask Jamie about it. But this is how it works. Let's go back to the person that had $100,000 in liquid assets. If they take, let's say it's in cash and mutual funds. If they take $50,000 out and they move it into this insurance investment, this hybrid policy, then they got a $50,000 still in the mutual funds and CDs, and they got another $50,000 in a permanent life insurance product. So what that means is they still have $100,000 on their balance sheet. They just diversified their investments, and they moved half of it over into this new product. Well, this product, let me tell you about what it does. First of all, like it has the life insurance aspect. So, and you don't have to do it all at once. If you're still working, you can do it, 5, 10-year payments or whatever. But for a lot of my clients, they're already retired. So I'm just going to maybe take $50,000, move it over here. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to tell them to do it, and they're going to call Cameron and Jamie to do it. But they're going to move that $50,000 over here. It's still an asset, because if you want your money back next week or next year, you have cash value. That $50,000 you can get back. It's no different than putting it in a savings account. So for whatever reason, you're like, I changed my mind. I want to buy a boat, or I want to put it back in the other investments. You can move it back. There's no penalty, correct? At any time, you can get your money back. You can't do that when you write the $2,000 check to long traditional, can you? That $2,000 is gone. You now got 98. So I like this for the first part is you can get back out of the deal if you change your mind. The second thing that is, upon your death, there's a life insurance benefit. Typically, let's Jamie, help me out. Let's say an average 65-year-old person, average health, they move $50,000 into this one of these policies, and let's say they die at 80 or 85 or whatever the average numbers are now. What would be and don't hold her to it, I'm asking her just to shoot from the hip, what would kind of be an idea of what that death benefit would be?
Roughly about double.
Okay, so if you put $50,000 in, when you pass away, assuming you've never pulled your $50,000 back, it'll pay out $100,000 of life insurance benefits to the kids or whomever. If between now and the time you pass away, if you have to go into the nursing home, what they will do, they will take that $50,000 and apply it toward long-term care costs. But here's the kicker, is they give you a multiplier effect of the cash value. You don't just get $50,000 to put to your long-term care. You could have done that by leaving the money in the investments, right? Instead, for that average person, what would be a typical range, a conservative typical range for a multiplier of that cash value?
About 4 to 5.
4 to 5. So let me put that in English, or let me rephrase this. If the person now has to go into long-term care at some point, they'll take that $50,000 and multiply it, she says 4 to 5. Let's go with the lower number of 4. And now that $50,000 has become $200,000 of long-term care insurance. But you don't have to, I hope you never use it. I hope that when you pass away, it's paid off in life in life insurance. So it's called a hybrid policy. And Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is it's easier to qualify for this than traditional long-term care insurance in terms of physical attributes, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So I like that much better. Real quick, I know everybody's probably came here, you probably have questions, okay? Hopefully you got something better to do than come here and listen to a lawyer talk on a Thursday night about this subject. If you don't, then your life is about as exciting as mine.
That's about how excited we are.
But if I try to answer everybody's questions, we'll be here till sunrise. So what we started doing a year or so ago, if you hold your questions to the end, we'll try to answer them. But a better scenario is if you have a question that I don't answer by the end, because I may answer it anyway, we're going to pass around a sign-up sheet for you. If you have the stamina to make it to the end, you'll have earned a free consultation here at our Missoula, or any of our other offices, if Missoula's not the best place, and you can come in and you can ask your question personally without a bunch of strangers listening, because the question you have is probably personal in nature. Probably has to do with your money, has to do with your health, maybe a family member, and this is just not a good, it's just not a good venue, because you might say, Steve, I'm recently divorced, I'm thinking about dating again, and I'm worth $25 million. What should I do? If you ask that in this room, when you leave here tonight, there will be a big long line in the parking lot. And I'll be in it. So it's a much better, and here's the other thing, is if you ask a question, I'm probably going to have to ask you 4 or 5 questions back in order to give you an intelligent answer. So it makes a lot more sense to just come in the office with no one else and you get 30-minute consultation. So we'll pass that around. What I started doing back in the spring, because a lot of people would write on there, I don't want to hear from you, I want to hear about the insurance, right? And so on this sign-up sheet I'm going to pass around, if you want, and I'm not selling your information to anybody. If you don't want to put your name on there, pass the clipboard on down the road. But one of the things on that sign-up sheet is, do you want to be contacted about the long-term care insurance? No one will call you unless you say, yes, I want someone to call me. And then they can give you some more information, because you can say, well, here's my health situation. Here's how old I am. You think I'll qualify? And how does it work? So later on, we'll pass that around. And if you want to hear more, because used to we'd get a big line of people wanting cards and everything. So this is a much better way. And this way, this allows you, when this is over, to leave instead of everybody waiting around for a half an hour. Okay, moving right along. So door number 2 is long-term care insurance. Remember, 4 options on how to pay for a nursing home, long-term care costs. And long-term care costs can include in-home care, okay? Personal savings, door number 2 is long-term care insurance, or maybe some combination of the two. Number 3, at first glance, is going to look very depressing, but I want us to focus on the silver lining in this gray cloud. I don't want to focus on the gray cloud, because we're coming into an election year, and you're going to hear a lot of talk about the need for affordable long-term care insurance so our loved ones won't get kicked out if they run out of money. Vote for me. It'll go something like that. And they're going to try to scare you into thinking that if you have no money, your loved one will not get the care that they need. So if you have a loved one and they don't have a lot of assets, it does not matter. I can get them all of the nursing home care they need for the rest of their life. Because the most important thing here is not preserving the assets, but getting the family member the care they need 24/7 by a team of professionals. Not a team of farmer boys, which is what I witnessed. All right? It's a wonder she made it as long as she did. Talking about my grandmother. All right. Number 3 is, if you go broke, if you have a family member that goes broke, runs out of money, they will qualify for Medicaid, and Medicaid will pay for their long-term care for the rest of their life. So the gray cloud here is you've gone broke. The silver lining is that we can qualify this person and get them the care that they need. Okay? So don't let the politicians scare you. We can get them the care. The very, very worst case scenario is we might have to move from one facility to another if they run out of money. But that is becoming less and less and less a reality, and I'll explain why shortly. Here's another thing I want to clear up, ladies and gentlemen. A couple years ago, AARP did a survey, and 66% of the respondents stated they believe that Medicare pays for long-term care. It does not. Medicare is health care. It's for going to the hospital, seeing the doctor, things such as that. Now, if you have a loved one that goes into an emergency room for 3+ days and then they're discharged to a rehab facility or a nursing home, Medicare will pay the first 100 days. But on day 101, you go from being a health care patient to a long-term care patient, and you're back to numbers 1 and 2, maybe number 3. So if you qualify for Medicare, that does not mean you have coverage for nursing home care. Difference of Medicare and Medicaid. If you have a loved one, 65 or older, has health issues and served a minimum of 1 day during wartime, and Stefan's probably the expert in the state on this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Stefan. That could mean someone could qualify if their first day in boot camp is the last day of the Vietnam War. Would they qualify? Okay. So being a wartime vet does not necessarily mean that we're dodging bullets. It just means you were enlisted and you could have possibly been dodging bullets, right? But remember when I said we have all of these policies, every law that we have is based on a public policy? Here's one of our public policies. We're going to take care of our wartime vets. Thank you for our freedom.
As they should.
As we should, absolutely. And so if you have a family member that was active duty at least 1 day during a wartime, they're having health issues over age 65, there's a very little known program called the Aid and Attendance Pension Program that we help all kinds of people with. It's so underutilized in this state. We can get families, depending on if they're married or single or a widow, because a widow will qualify for this program, meaning typically is the case a female has outlived her husband and the husband served during war. So she's a widow of a wartime vet, but she herself is over 65 and has health issues. We can get anywhere from $15,000 to about $26,000 a year, which is tax-free. Money from the VA to the vet or the vet's family is tax-free. If you're married and you qualify these boxes, you can check all these boxes and qualify, then the pension plan is $26,000 a year, paid evenly monthly for the rest of your life tax-free. It's a huge, huge, huge thing, particularly for people on a fixed income.
What's it called?
VA Aid and Attendance Plan. And all you got to do, that's the state expert. As a matter of fact, he just got back from Denver, spent 2 days down there on that. Stephan, was there any attorneys from Montana there when you were there? No.
No, there's not.
He's the guy to talk to.
What about Washington?
Maybe.
This is federal law. It applies to all states. Okay, so when we're doing the VA, it doesn't matter which state we're in. The laws are going to be the same. If you move, Nothing changes. All right, I just want you to be aware that if you got a loved one, we could change their life in sometimes. Okay. And all they got to know is just give us a call or give Stephen a call and he can explain how it works. There is a fourth door. Most people know about these three doors right here. But we have these other public policies out there, public policies that, in addition to us wanting to take care of our wartime vets, we have policies that say we're going to take care of our disabled population. We want to prevent spousal impoverishment. We want to encourage families to take care of their loved ones for as long as possible before turning them over to the nursing home. So we have all of these different types because the nursing homes can be pretty stressed, right, in terms of demand. So we have all these public policies that laws have been created, and more accurately, it's not that the laws have been created so much as we have created exceptions, exclusions, and exemptions to laws to support these public policies. All right? Door number 4, if you knock on door number 4, Stephen will answer, and he may be able to use some of these laws that I'm talking about to allow you to shelter some of your assets so you can qualify for Medicaid before going broke. Okay? Number 3, if you go broke, you qualify for Medicaid. The thing is, there's ways you can protect your assets using the law. You don't have to go completely broke to qualify for Medicaid. And we do this in 2 ways, and I want you to think about this in terms of the clients we serve. The first client that we serve is, this is you coming in, you have no health issues, but you need an estate plan, and you tell us, while you're creating this estate plan, can you please add some asset protection so I don't lose my house? So we call this proactive planning. It's me creating a plan for you that I hope you never need. I mean, we're all going to need an estate plan when we pass away, but I'm hoping that that you're not going into a nursing home. But I'm still, if you hire us to that, we can put a protective wrapper around this house so, God forbid, you do go in a nursing home, you don't lose the house. So proactive is this is me creating a plan I hope you never need, all right? Number 2, or B, I should say, is crisis planning. So this is when we get, so this is when there has been no proactive planning done, and we get a call, and the call goes something like this: Steve, my mom had a stroke, and I don't even know what questions to ask. Or, Steve, my wife's dementia has reached a point where I can't do it anymore all by myself. Or, Steve, Mom's been in the nursing home for 2 years, and I can do the math, and we're going to run out of money in January. So we get these kind of calls all the time. This is a crisis situation because the health care need is here, and the assets are being squandered or about to. And so at this point, the law office is all hands on deck. Let's see if we can stop the bleeding. Okay? I hate to make... I'm a big believer of under-promising and over-delivering. But internally, our internal policy with the firm is in a crisis situation, we're going to save half the assets. So I get the call up, Mom's got $180,000 left, we're going to go after at least 90. And we might do even better. Sometimes it depends on the type of the assets and some of the family member characteristics. But a lot of people don't know that. There's laws out there, particularly for married couples. A lot of protection out there to prevent spousal impoverishment. But if you have a loved one that's in a nursing home or facing a nursing home, that could be a reality down the road. The sooner you can jump on this, the more money you can save, right? So, moving on, I want to clear up some myths about Medicaid. I started doing these workshops a few years ago for this very reason. Because we've been led to believe to fear Medicaid. And the reason that people fear it is because you associate it with being broke. We don't want to be broke. If I qualify for Medicaid, that means I'm broke. Well, there's two types of Medicaid. There's Medicaid for people who can't afford health insurance. So this is the single mom. She needs a little help. So we're going to provide health insurance for this person. The other type of Medicaid is for long-term care, okay, which is what we're talking about tonight. A different Medicaid program set up to pay for seniors that need long-term care, seniors who have run out of money, okay? But the first myth is there's these Medicaid facilities. Well, Steve, I don't want you to do this because that means that mom will have to go to a Medicaid facility. Well, here's the fact about that. 65% of Americans in nursing homes are paying for it with Medicaid. So if this myth was correct, that means 2 out of every 3 nursing homes would only have Medicaid patients, which is, of course, is not the case. The truth is, most places you see now have Medicaid patients. Now, this is what you're going to hear. You may hear this. We're not accepting new Medicaid patients. And because they're privately owned, they have a say. They can discriminate on who they let in. Can't sue a private individual for discrimination, right? So, here's the idea. Most places are going to have a couple of beds available. And they want to reserve those beds for people coming in paying privately, because private pay is a lot more, or a little bit more, than Medicaid. Medicaid, I think it's like 70%. So they want to save those beds for new people coming in who are going to pay 100%. But here's what they're not going to tell you. If you go in with private pay and you run out of money, they probably got someone up front that's got a Medicaid application, and they're going to fill out, and they're going to keep you. Because the nursing homes, they don't want open beds, right? And they would rather get 70% of something, particularly for a really good family and a good client, good resident. They would rather have 70% of something than 100% of nothing. So most people go in private pay, pick out the place that you like, and I'm never absolute on this because it changes on a daily basis. But just about every place in town has Medicaid patients, okay? Because who in their right mind would go into business and say, I'm not going to serve 65% of the customers, right? Once you start applying common sense to this and your logic, you're like, well, yeah, why would you focus your business on only 1/3 of the customers, right? Folks, so who are these 65%? A lot of people think, well, if they're in Medicaid and they're there, that's the homeless population. Let me ask you, is 65% of our population homeless? No. Folks, this 65% represents, this is people like us who after 3 years run out of money, okay? And we have a system in place to protect those people. And this is the Medicaid, it's what we're talking about. Every paycheck you ever received, you paid money into this system. Every one of you. Don't be afraid to use it as an emergency backup plan. Right? You've been paying in it forever. So we don't want to abuse the system. We don't want to commit fraud. But my point is I want everyone to kind of exhale and say, worst case scenario, we'll get all the care we need. All right? And we have the option to preserve some assets. So the house goes to kids and not the nursing home. That's what all of this is about. The next myth is there's these Medicaid wings and beds, and the idea is, well, all right, Steve, I'll buy what you said. I can go into this nursing home over here that we really like, but we don't want to put mom down there in the Medicaid wing. They'll put her in a Medicaid bed. Folks, Medicaid bed is an accounting term. That just means how many people are paying with Medicaid. The fact is, folks, that it is discriminatory to treat people differently based on how they pay. So what I'm trying to do is clear up a lot of these bad rumors that are out there. There's no reason to fear paying for long-term care with Medicaid, all right? Medicaid qualifications in a nutshell. If you have a loved one and you want to find out if they qualify for Medicaid to pay for the long-term care, how does one qualify? Well, the old saying is you got to be You got to be old, sick, and broke. That's the old saying. Well, what does that mean? Let's define that. Old mean these laws come from Social Security. That's where we get 65. Old means 65 or we already established that 65 is the new 35.
Yeah.
Blind or disabled. So you could be 19 and blind, 25 and disabled, and you would be old. So 65, and I look around, there might be one or two of you in here that qualify for 65. It's not that old, okay? So think about it this way. If I'm trying to qualify your loved one for Medicaid, I got to check these 3 boxes. The first one, if we're looking at a nursing home, we're probably going to qualify. Number 2 says you got to be sick. Well, sick doesn't mean that you're an invalid. It just means that you have trouble with 2 of your 6 activities of daily living. You have trouble getting around or getting dressed or bathing or feeding yourself or what have you. Maybe you got balance issues. Maybe your arthritis is so bad you can't tie your shoes. But if you think about it, why would someone be interested in an assisted living or nursing home if they weren't medically sick, right? So so old and sick are kind of by default. Kind of by default. The third one though, broke, that's the one that is hard for people to qualify. And it says, broke means you own less than $2,000 of, and ma'am, can you say this real loud for the people who can't see it in the back? What does the underlined word say?
Countable.
Countable. Very nice voice. Now the reason I want everybody to kind of wake up and hear that is that does not say total assets, does it? Kind of piques your interest, right? It raises a question. Accountable asset, I can only have 2,000 of those, but there's no limit of uncountable. There's no limit to how many assets you can have if they're uncountable, right? Well, let's just go to the next page. I want you to focus on the left column and not the right column. We'll get to the right column soon enough. I get this information from the Medicaid application. We have to fill out a Medicaid application. It's going to ask for all of this, and then we're going to total it up at the bottom. And if you got more than 2,000 of that, you're not going to qualify. Well, a little quick scrutiny looks at that and says, well, Steve, my gosh, that's everything. That's my cash. That's my retirement accounts. My real estate. And here's a big one. Any gift that you made in the last 60 months. Take 60 months, you divide it by 12 months, that gives you 5 years. Anyone heard of the 5-year look-back period? Yep. Here's the concept of the 5-year look-back period. It is designed to prevent Medicaid fraud. So we don't want millionaire Mike, who's going into the nursing home on Tuesday to give all of his assets to his daughter on Monday, and then goes into the nursing home on Tuesday and say, hey, where's the application for the old sick broke people? All right? That's called fraud, if you tried to hide that. I love all my clients, I'm going to jail for no one. That's not what we do, because a lot of times we have people that'll come, it's usually a guy that wants to say, you know, he's here to kind of figure out how to beat the system, right? He likes to live in the gray. Folks, I'm not here to teach you how to cheat the system. I'm here to tell you about laws and empower you with the idea to use the laws for your benefit to understand how the system works. Okay? So all of this is federal law. It's all federal law. So with the 5-year look-back period, think about this in terms of a proactive plan. All right? So if you come in and we add up your assets and let's say you have a $300,000 average home. You got another $100,000 in savings from your lifetime savings. Well, you're not going to qualify for Medicaid, are you? You have $400,000 of assets. That's more than $2,000. This is what I would do. I would take that house. If you're wanting me to protect it, I'm going to take that house and I'm going to get it out of your name. You have 2 options. You can put that name in a family member's name, which I see a lot, or you can hire Stephan to create a very specific type of trust to hold that house like a safe harbor trust. Okay? And as soon as that house comes out of your name and into either the family member or the trust name, you've started a 60-month clock ticking. So if we did this tomorrow, in October of 2024, guess what happens? Your $300,000 house levitates up, drops over, and drops down into the friendly column. That's what I said earlier. I said sometimes it takes seasoning. If we're doing proactive planning, anything you want to protect, I got to put into a trust and count 5 years. But guess what? After 5 years, it's no longer countable. So if we did that, you had the $300,000 house and $100,000 in savings or investments. After 5 years, now you've only got $100,000 of countable assets. That's a lot closer to $2,000, right? As a matter of fact, it won't take very many months in the nursing home to get down to $2,000. But guess what we will have done? The house will go to the kids and not the nursing home. If you have a farm, this is what I'm saying. If I had a time machine, I could go back and save the family farm. So that's how it works in proactive planning, is we're going to figure out which assets are we going to maybe put over here and get the 5-year clock ticking on. And then after 5 years, it's non-countable. The only way it would ever be countable is to put it back in your name, which you wouldn't want to do. Now, this is what I hear a lot. Steve, I put my house in my daughter's name and I added her to my accounts. Didn't I do good? Now, in a crowd this size, 4.2 of you have done that? Because I've done this enough, and I can tell I've already identified several by your faces. We already had one person earlier admit it before I even got to the subject. Now, why would someone take their house and put it in their daughter's name and add her to their accounts? Well, 2 reasons. One is if they do that after 5 years, they'll qualify for Medicaid. The second thing is when they pass away, guess what we can avoid?
Inheritance tax.
Probate. Thank you, sir. I got to start bringing candy or something to hand out for good answer. I don't have anything. Can I get you a cup of coffee? I'm glad you said no, because I just remembered I was told that the coffee pots aren't working. So anyway, all right. What's that?
Peanut butter cups.
Peanut butter cups. I'm out of those too, but if I ever see you and I have one, I'll give it to you. All right.
Goes the same way as the microphone.
All right. So a lot of people do that, and if you have done that, you have not crossed a line that you can't uncross, folks. But I'm going to explain to you later why there's a much smarter way to achieve the same goal. All right? Now, I want you to think about this in terms now of a crisis plan. So again, proactive, we're going to take some assets, maybe put it in a protective trust, and after 5 years it's no longer countable, you're not going to lose it. That's kind of the idea on proactive. It's a little more complicated than that, but I'm just trying to give you the 30,000-foot flyover view. Now, on a crisis client, we get the call up, says, Mom's going to run out of money in 12 months. We don't have 5 years, do we? So I'm not going to take these assets and put it into a protective trust and wait 5 years. We need all hands on deck today. And we have other laws that we're going to use. So in a crisis planning strategy, let's say I'm called up I'm told, Mom's got $202,000 and she's relatively healthy, and I know that in 2 years we're going to be out of money. Steve, is there any way I can save any of the money? Well, this is what I'm going to do. Now, the reason I said $202,000 is because Mom can have $2,000, right?
Yeah.
So now I got $200,000. I want to see, can I save any of that for the family? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look over to the right column and say, hey, is there any, and folks, that's an abbreviated version. If I put everything up, the right column would run right down through the floor, all the way to the back of the room. So these are just some of the ones we use most often. Here's an opportunity that is based on public policy. You know what is really sad? And some of you have seen this, is when a family spends all of their money paying nursing home bills and the loved one passes away and there's no money for a funeral. It happens. So guess what? There's a public policy that says, hey, we want to avoid that. So we pass an exception to the law being the 5-year look-back period. There's an exception. We can go buy an irrevocable prepaid burial plan ahead of time. And I could spend up to $5,000 of cash on that. So remember, mom's at $200,000 now. I can move $5,000 immediately. We're going to need it at some point, all of us. Okay? So now we're down to $195,000. We're down to $195,000. Plus, we know that mom has a burial plan. There's other public policies. We can start moving money over there. Kind of outside the scope of tonight is a personal caregiver agreement. We can move tens of thousands of dollars here, and the idea is this. Let's say that you have a mom that lives in Spokane or is in a nursing home in Spokane, and you want to make sure that mom has the right kind of companionship, right? You know she's getting the medical care, but is anybody playing checkers with her? Is anybody just coming and talking to her, hanging out, watching TV, or maybe taking her outside for a stroll? If you want to, it's not unusual if you're like, well, I'm worried about mom, so what people will often do is they will hire someone to go by, 5-10 hours a week just to provide some companionship care, not medical care. And if you do that, that's going to cost you a minimum of $25 an hour probably. So you're looking at $250 to $500 a week for that. It's very expensive. Or they could be at home. They could be at home and you're just sending someone over there to do some in-home care. So if your mom is not in Spokane, but say she's in Missoula, we can set up a contract for the child to do the same thing. And if you track it and you keep a logbook, we just basically we can figure out, using actuarial statistics, say this is the expected life expectancy for this person, 7.5 more years. And then we can multiply that times the $500 a week or whatever. We come up with a sizable amount of money, right? That's tens of thousands. We don't want to poke the bear. We want to, but in this case, that might allow me to move, I don't know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, right? Let's say that we have a good day and I do a personal caregiver agreement for $50,000. Now the child has to go by and see mom, which is, hopefully they're going to do that anyway, right? But if they do that and they keep their records, we're going to take that $50,000 of cash and instead of paying it to some agency, we're going to pay it to the child. Didn't know that. That's something that the kid was probably doing anyway. But if we do that, I can move that $50,000 from here over to here. Basically, it's going to go to the kid. The kid will have to pay taxes on that just like the in-home caregiver would, but hey, you get to keep 80% of it or whatever. So now we started out with $202, right? $2,000 get to keep, $5,000 for the burial plan, another $50,000 for the caregiver agreement. We're now down to $145,000. There's other things that we can do. Let's make my math simple and say we're actually down to $140,000. In certain circumstances, we get to use the closest thing to a magic wand in our toolbox. And there's some cases allow us to use a certain type of annuity, a Medicaid compliant annuity, where I can take half of whatever is left, put it into this annuity. So if in this case we were at $140,000, if this family qualified for this exception, I could now get them down to $70,000. That's about as far as I'm going to be able to do. So family calls me up with $202,000 and we start moving assets from the countable column over to the non-countable column. I might dwindle that 202 down to $70,000. That $70,000 is called your spend down amount. You got to spend that $70,000 down over the next less than a year. But once you spend that down, you'll qualify for Medicaid. If you take 202 and subtract 70, that's $132,000. That means we saved $132,000 and we spent down 70. If the person hadn't have called us, they would have spent $202,000 instead of 70. So that's an example how we use the laws which are passed based on public policy, and there's a bunch of exceptions. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. It depends on We have all kinds of exceptions out there. But I just very quickly showed you how I can take that $202,000 and get it down to a maximum exposure of $70,000. We do this all the time. If you have a family member, the sooner we can do it, the more we can help. Because it always saddens me to find out that the family member's been in for 4 years, because I'm thinking, well, there's $200,000 I probably could have saved the family. And if you hire a lawyer to do this for you, guess what? The legal fees are paid out of the spin down. That money's got to go to the nursing home anyway before you qualify for Medicaid. However, lawyers draft the laws. But it also makes sense. Any kind of fees that you got to pay in order to qualify for the application is deducted from the spin down. So really, our fees aren't free, but they're coming out of fees that would have gone to the nursing home. You follow me? All right. What I want to do real quick, because, well, hold on. Let me go through this real quick. Remember when I said that I hear this a lot? I put my house in my daughter's name and I added to our accounts. And I said that a lot of you, some of you have done that. That's fine. That's fine. You haven't crossed it. And if it's been more than 5 years, we might want to let that sleeping dog lie. But if it hasn't, but if it's been 2 years or less, or if you haven't done it, I want you to think about a different option. Again, take the house out of your name, put it in the kid's name after 5 years. It's non-countable. You got two options. You can either put that house or your assets into someone else's name, got to get it out of your name, or you can park it in a trust. And upon your death, asset comes out of the trust and go to your loved ones, just like with a will. So you got two options. They both have downsides. The first downside with a family, if you put it in your daughter's name, do I have a married couple here? Thank you for volunteering.
My other couple somewhere else, but
Beg your pardon.
we have a daughter that we're thinking about doing this with.
So I want to be very careful here. Is this your husband?
No.
Is this your husband?
Yes.
No, okay. Thank you for volunteering. Not sure the way I like the way she's cutting her eyes at him. Are you? I'm joking.
He has a rental house.
He has a rental house. That's right. Here's a public policy. Our country believes it's good to encourage home ownership. And the idea is, well, it provides for a more stable economy in that for some people, the equity in their home is their only savings account. It also gives you a really good defense about ever being homeless, right? You may have to borrow against your money, your house, but we encourage home ownership. So what do? We pass all these laws or exceptions to laws to encourage people to buy homes. The simplest one to think of is your mortgage interest is deductible up to a cap, right? So to buy a house, you can deduct your mortgage interest up to an amount. There's also, anyone ever heard of a declaration of homestead? Very good. I'm going to let you finish the rest of this, sir. Declaration of homestead. If you do not know what that is, and if you own a home, Google Montana Declaration of Homestead. It's a one-page document, maybe two. If you'll fill this out, you got to just Google it, print it. Declaration of Homestead. And yes, this law comes from the days of homesteading. If you'll fill this out and sign it, and you're going to need to get it notarized, and you record this document at the clerk and recorder's office in the county where you live, as soon as you do that, you will have created $250,000 of equity protection from lawsuits. Okay? So you file this and you say, this house is my homestead. Even if you just moved in it, you just bought it. You file that, this is my homestead. If you are later sued, the Declaration of Homestead allows you to protect the first $250,000 of equity. If you're married, well, let me back off. You can protect $250,000 from getting sued. If you have pledged that house, in the case of a mortgage, That's different. If you've pledged your house as collateral, you can't use the declaration of homestead to get out of your mortgage. But if you are sued, then you can protect that. So if you see a lawsuit coming, let's say that you have a $250,000 house and you owe $100,000 on it. That means you have equity of $150,000, right? And you got $100,000 in other assets. If you think you're going to get sued, I want you to take that $100,000 and go pay down your mortgage. Do you see what we just did? Because we can protect $250,000 from a lawsuit. Okay? Now, that's called a declaration of homestead. There's other laws. Anyone ever heard of a 121 exclusion? Now we're getting out in the weeds. Now it's getting fun. Section 121 of the Internal Revenue Code says, if you have lived in your house 2 of the last 5 years, and you sell your house, you do not have to pay capital gains tax on the first $250,000 of gain. If you are married, we get to double that to $500,000. You each get $250,000 of gain. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the reason when you sell your house, you don't have to pay any taxes on it, pretty much. You would have to have your house appreciate, if you're married, over $500,000 to owe any taxes. So either you bought it in 1911 or Oprah bought the ranch next to you. So there's another way we created a law to encourage home ownership. There's no asset that you can own with more legal protections than your primary residence. Your cash has 0 legal protection. So the worst thing you can do from a strict asset protection standpoint, sell your house, convert it to cash. And that's what a lot of people do when they want to pay for a nursing home cost. They sell mom's house, convert it to cash. I can't do anything, or I can do things, but not as much as if the house was still there. Okay. Let's say you bought your house here in 1990 for $30,000. Now it's worth $530,000 because you live in western Montana. And your house is worth slightly more than average. So if you paid $30,000 for your house, that's called your cost basis. The accountants are going to say that's your basis. What you pay for an asset is your basis. So in 1988, when you bought that for $30,000, you paid $30,000. All right. If you sold it today for $530,000, you've got a gain of $500,000. You guys sell it, you pay 0 in taxes. If you're single, you get $250,000, right? You buy it for $30,000, sell it for $280,000 before you pay any taxes. Now, so I'm kind of rambling. I want to circle back around to this because I got off on the tangent. The number one downside is disastrous tax consequences. Okay, let's say they put their house in daughter's name today and you continue living there. And after 5 years, it's non-countable. But upon your death, if your daughter goes to sell that house, because why? Because she lives in Minneapolis and she has a mortgage of her own. She's going to sell the house, pay off her own. She doesn't need 2 homes. If she sells that house, and let's say it sells for $530,000, and she has a $500,000 gain, does she get the 121 exclusion? Not unless she lived there 2 of the last 5 years. So what is daughter going to owe when she sells that house? She's going to owe capital gains taxes. And let's make my math simple and say her tax rate is 20%. She's going to owe $100,000 in taxes when she sells your house. Also, you could avoid $2,000 of probate. Or $3,000 or whatever it's running, 4 or 5 now. However, if you leave that house to her in your will or a trust, how does it work then? Well, there's a difference of giving and inheriting. If you put the house in daughter's name while you're alive, you have given her the house, and when you do that, you give her your cost basis. So her basis is $30,000, just the same as yours. However, if she inherits it, what is her basis? Not what you paid. The basis is what was the house worth on the date of your death. It's called date of death value. In this case, the house was worth $530 when they died, and she turns around and sells it in a relatively short period of time for $530. Her basis is $530. Fair market value is $530. That's a 0% gain. You guys see the difference? I just saved you $100,000 in taxes. That one's for free. It's what we don't know that typically gets us, right? Here's another thing. What happens if you put your house in daughter's name and 2 years later she goes through a divorce? What then? Your best case scenario might be your future roommate's your ex-son-in-law. Whoa. Talk about stepping on the rake. Or even worse, what if you put this house in your daughter's name and she hits that van full of trial lawyers? You're homeless. You sure as heck don't want to be rooming with any of those guys, right? I'm a lawyer, so I can pick on them. I'm just like you guys. I can pick on lawyers too. So I say this jokingly, but you can see the potential risk. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want you to ever, ever, ever put your assets in anyone else's name. Why? Because your assets become a target for their liabilities. And here's another point to consider. Who's at a greater risk of being sued or divorced? Them or their daughter? Not even close. Their daughter. If you go down to the courthouse and you look at all the unhappy people, which are most, whether they're there getting divorced, filing bankruptcy, or getting sued, or wearing an orange jumpsuit, the vast majority of those people will be between the ages of 18 and 50. And we hit 50, we're less active and we start acquiring wisdom. So if you take your house, I'm assuming the both of you are over 50, right? 51, 52? All right. If you take your house out of your name and you put it in your daughter's name, you've just exposed it to greater risk. Not only is it greater risk, but it's risk that you have zero control over, unless she consults you about marital advice. Yeah.
So what's the answer?
Well, we're going to get to what the answer is. There's a fourth downside to put it in your kid's name. Remember when I said that people would call and I'd say, yes, you can protect your assets, but if it's done incorrectly, it will be worse than doing nothing at all? In the crisis cases that I shared with you a while ago, it's for people who have done no proactive planning. They have done nothing. I still have all of those laws where I can still maybe go save half the assets, if not more, right? But if you hire a shade tree estate planner to do this for you, and it's done incorrectly, what if we can't get the assets back into your name? So let's say that you've put it in your daughter's name, or it was done incorrectly, and then she loses the house in a divorce or lawsuit. And then the very next day you call up and said, my husband had a stroke when he found out about we're now homeless. And I need you to get us, I really need you to help us get him qualified for Medicaid so I can find a nursing home to put him in. Well, guess what? You're not going to qualify. Why? Because in the last 5 years, you made a $530,000 gift. Remember the 5-year look-back period? Oh, and by the way, what is it? When will he be able to qualify? We'll take that $530,000 and divide it by what? About $7,000, $8,000? $7,155, says the brilliant guy up front. 8 years? Something like that? Almost. That means you won't even qualify for Medicaid for 8 years. So what are we going to do in the next 8 years? This, ladies and gentlemen, this is the only time I can't get someone's nursing home paid for. You have no money to pay for it yourself. Why? Because you added her to your accounts also. When you added her to your accounts, she became either a 50% or a 1/3. It's okay. We get some water up here.
We're already
You haven't crossed the line. You can't uncross. I know. It's all right. It's all right. That's the reason we're having this workshop. To face our fears and develop a better plan. It's okay. It's okay. He had a nice tan when he walked in. Now he's white as a ghost. You can see how, and folks, I make light of this because I want this to be an okay topic for. Look, I take my job very seriously, but I have found that if I'm kind of a little bit lighthearted, you're going to associate that with this topic, and it's not so scary to talk about. You guys follow me? Okay, so I'm not flippant nor cavalier with what I do, but I'm trying to set a feeling and tone about this subject, so who knows, you might even talk about it one day with your family, all right? And don't be afraid of it. You're not alone. Every one of us in here. Death and taxes, right? I hitched my wagon to two pretty sure industries. Okay. So if it's done incorrectly and I can't get it back, that's the scenario where it's worse than doing nothing at all. There is a better way. So based on all of these downsides, lawyers said, hey, let's create a better way. And so what we did is we created a concept of what's called think of it as a safe harbor trust. Okay? Designed to avoid all of this. Industry, the lawyers, we refer to it as a Medicaid compliant irrevocable trust. Folks, there's all kinds of trusts. Depends on what the need is. Let me explain real quick. If you have a revocable living trust, that provides protection for your beneficiaries or heirs. No protection for you. If you want protection for you, that trust better be irrevocable. Okay? That's the big difference. You're like, well, I've heard things about irrevocables. It scares me. It can be done a certain way. You put the assets in, we can get them back out and put it in your name. We can undo it. It's got to be done a certain way. Okay? If you put your house into this irrevocable trust, that does not mean that you are chained to that address the rest of your life. The trust can buy and sell homes the same as you. Okay? It's not uncommon for people to cycle 2 or 3 different homes through this trust through the rest of their life. It does not start a new look-back period. So what we want to do is we want to create a way to avoid all of this. Now, real quick, let me explain to you about trust, because trust can get a bad rap, because the only ones we ever hear about are the ones that blow up. All a trust is a will substitute, and it's designed to be administered privately. And the origins date back to the days of medieval knights, where Sir Steve's going to go off to the Crusades. And all I got is a bag of gold, all right? Because I'm a Rolling Stone knight. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the knight would. He would go up to his most trustworthy friend and confidant, the local bartender. And he'd say, here's my bag of gold. If I'm not back in 6 months, that means the jousting tournament did not go so well. And if I don't return, take the bag of gold, pay off my tab, keep a few shillings for your trouble, and give what's left over to my fair maiden. And if he came back, he got it back. But that was how the knight entrusted his friend for the benefit of the fair maiden. It works just the same today. Except we call this person, the knight, the grantor, also known as the trustor or trust maker. Our firm uses the term grantor. The grantor hires an attorney and grants into the trust assets, like the bag of gold. Now you got to choose someone that you trust. Could be your bartender. I would persuade you otherwise. Usually it's, in this scenario, would be your children, jointly, or maybe just pick one. Who's closest and trustworthy, right? And instead of the fair maiden, we call it the beneficiaries. And the beneficiaries are who would inherit through your will. If it's your kids, then your kids are the beneficiaries. If you have responsible kids, they're probably going to wear both hats, beneficiaries and trustee. So you're 3 parties to a trust: grantor, trustee, beneficiary. And normally of these three roles, there's usually only 2 players. You got the parent and the kids. Sometimes the parent serves as the trustee, sometimes the kids serve. So A trust is just a contract, folks. A trust is designed to mimic a will. It's not a legal entity or like a corporation. There's no annual upkeep. There's not. Here's the other reason I want you to appoint a kid, if you can, as trustee. They're not going to charge you any fees, most likely. And if they do, maybe we should choose a different child. And you've got tremendous leverage over this trustee if they're also the beneficiary, right? Because you can threaten to disinherit them if they don't do exactly what you do. I tell them to do. We can also fire them if they don't do what you tell them to do. Okay? So the way that it works, you control the trustee, they control the trust. That's how it's got to work in order to trigger the asset protection. So back to this scenario, what happens if instead of putting that house in account's and daughter's name, you hired Stephen and he creates this trust, this safe harbor trust. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take your house. Let's just say we're doing that because for 80% of the clients, we're doing proactive planning, we're just doing the house. So we take the house and we put it in this trust. As soon as we do that, your 60-month clock starts ticking. Okay? Now let's go through these same scenarios. Through the rest of your life, you live in the house is in the name of the trust, not daughter's name. Upon your death, the house comes out of the trust and goes to your daughter. She gets the step up in basis. She pays zero in taxes. That's number one. So that's how we avoid that. Let her inherit it. Don't give it to her today. If you've got ag land or land, it's probably got a really low basis compared to what it's worth today. You're going to get creamed on it on capital gains if you did something like this, which is what was happening with my grandmother. They were having to sell this land that had been in her name for 40 years. It probably went from $100 an acre to $1,000 an acre in value or something like that. So you're getting creamed on the taxes. So that's how we avoid it. Number two, if daughter goes through a divorce and your house is in this trust, do you lose the house? Anybody want to take a guess? No. Why? Because it's not in her name. As a matter of fact, she may never inherit it. She could die before you. You could remove her from the trust. So there's no guarantee she'd get it anyway. It's not hers. Being a beneficiary of the trust does not mean you own the trust. Just like if you name me the beneficiary of your life insurance and then tomorrow you change it to someone else, I never had a legal claim to that. Right? Same thing here with your trust. So if she gets divorced or sued, you're not going to lose your house. That alone sounds pretty good. But after 5 years, guess what? You will qualify. So this is kind of the way it works. We put it in the trust. Whatever happens to daughter is irrelevant to your bottom line. After 5 years, you'll qualify for Medicaid, or you may have a small spend down. And then upon your death, it passes to your daughter. She gets to step up in basis. Does that sound a little bit better than the first scenario? So this has been designed to accomplish this without the downsides. Much, much better way. Never, ever, ever put your assets in someone else's name. That's the last time I'll say that. Okay? I was told one time that if you're doing something like this and you do something crazy, people will remember it. So I'm going to try this. Don't ever put your house in anyone else's name. Now, if I did that correctly, that's sunk to long term. All right. But what's the downside? What's the downside? Few attorneys know how to do it, and if it's done incorrectly, you're back to the...
How are you going to know if it's done correctly?
That's the problem, is you're not going to find out until later. I'll give you a hint. If you call me up tomorrow and say, Steve, I don't have time to go into this, but I'm in serious need of a DNA-based murder defense. We'll discuss details later. I'm going to say, I'm not your guy. Best thing I can do is help you get a ticket to Mexico. Get you the name of Barry Shack. To answer your question, you want a specialist. Just like you're going to want Barry Shack, not me. or you want, or plane tickets. You want to find an elder law attorney. They're probably the only one. As a matter of fact, there's 2 or 3 attorneys in the entire state of Montana outside of our firm that does this. Okay, so this is one of those areas. If you have an area that's a specialty, like bankruptcy or trademarks or something like elder law, you don't want someone learning on your dime. I tried that once with a home remodel. It was very expensive. Yeah, I can do electrical. Yeah, all right. So, what I have done, I've shared with you all this theory. Stefan's actually going to get up and share with you a couple of real case scenarios where he took all this I talked about and helped people here locally. But before we do, because when we're done, I want everyone to be able to leave without standing in line to sign anything. We're going to pass around the sign-ups. If you don't want to come in for a consult, just pass it to your neighbor. If you want to come in for a consult, this is what it looks like. I put this up because it can be a little confusing. Your name, your number, you've got that figured out. Type of consult, estate plan or crisis plan. I want you, if you're coming in, you got a question. Oh, by the way, if you want to come in for a free consult, we're only going to probably be able to advise you on this very narrow area. Anything else, I'm just going to give you the name of someone else, like a DNA-based murder defense guy. But if it's estate planning, wills, asset protection, then please come in. We'll see what we can help you with. However, if you want to come talk to us about a crisis situation, I want you to check this box, and the reason is I want to move you to the front of the list. The proactive plans, what's a month or two? If it's a crisis situation, I want you in within 72 hours. So if there's anybody in here who wants to come in about a crisis, we want you to check that so we can move you to the front of the list. And I think everybody would understand, right? If someone's got a mother at home that had a stroke, might want to get them in as fast as we can. Now, over here it says interested in referral for long-term care with Cam and Jamie. Yes, I'm interested. If you're not interested, don't worry about checking no. If you want to hear from them, check that and they'll give you a call. If you don't, no one's going to be calling you. All right, so I just wanted to explain that. And having said that, I want to hand off to Stefan, but I want to give him my microphone because we're actually recording this.
No, I haven't.
Oh, you're ready to go. Go ahead.
So my name's Stefan Colas. I am the managing attorney in Missoula. I have been doing this for 3 years. Before I went to law school, after I graduated college, I did AmeriCorps for 2 years, which is, volunteered helping low-income folks file legal documents on their own, divorces, parenting plans, landlord-tenant issues. So I did that for 2 years, and then I worked at Montana Legal Service Association, which is a nonprofit law firm, also helping low-income folks. So Steve comes from, a higher income concern, clients, right? I come from low-income clients. And this is a really interesting comparison for the two of us because we're dealing with the same thing. We're trying to do asset protections. We're trying to keep people out of poverty. And so I have just had a really great time learning how this law works. We're going to go over 2 cases. One is an individual, and the other is a married couple. Elvis is our individual. And Sonny and Cher are our married couple. These are cases I've walked through the past year and a half. You're gonna see how my brain works, so I apologize. You're just gonna have to hang on for a little bit. These cases tend to be very fact specific, and they also tend to be very based on what your goals are. And so we spend a fair amount of time saying, what is it that your priorities are so that we can achieve your goal? Our single individual, Elvis, 75 years old, she's unmarried, she's had Alzheimer's. She has, a house. It's actually a triplex in this case. worth $350,000. She's got about $10,000 in her bank, $8,000 annuity. So she's worth just under $400,000. Her major asset is her house, right? She's got an income of $1,500. Not a ton, especially when we start looking at what the cost of care is. She has $80,000 of debt to the nursing home. She's been in the facility for years. They've been underpaying. It's a miracle that the nursing facility hasn't evicted them. If they hadn't done anything, we're writing a check of $7,500 every single month to the facility. That's an average rate. Here in Missoula, what I see normally is $8,000 to $9,000 a month. We have $378,000 of assets that are not protected, and if she would just follow what the nursing home tells her, she's going to sell all of that. If she lives for 10 years, that's a $900,000 bill, right? Kids get nothing, right? If that's a concern of hers. What can you do? Well, we were able to save about $275,000. We found out, number one, that her deceased husband was a wartime veteran. VA pension will help pay. They're actually going to end up writing a check of about $20,000 to her for unreimbursed medical expenses. That's going to deal with the debt, a piece of the debt, the $80,000 that she owed, right, to the facility. Steve showed you that spreadsheet, what's countable and what's not countable, right? We also, in our investigations, found out that the child, one of her kids, was a disabled vet himself. There's an exception to the law about transfers. So Steve said, if you transfer an asset for less than fair market value within 5 years, Medicaid will issue a penalty, right? That's true in most cases, but there are some exceptions. You can transfer your primary residence to a disabled child and not have a penalty, right? We had to get the Social Security Administration disability award letter, but after that, the transfer went through without a hitch. $350,000 to the kid, right? He's disabled. He's now got a stream of income. It was a triplex, right? He gets the rent now. We had, $40,000 in bank and mutual funds. Okay, we're going to buy a prepaid burial policy for $5,000. We ended up spending, there was $118,000 moving this over. VA pension is going to pay $1,200 a month, $14,000 per year. These are not, every single case ends up being very different. We can't control whether your kid's disabled or, someone's a veteran, but these are the situations that when you come in, we run you through the system. We say, are you, were you a vet? Were you married to a vet? Did you have a disabled kid? Do you have a kid living in the house taking care of you? These are all the kinds of things that we want to look at to see if we can use these exceptions to protect assets for you. Sonny and Cher. Now, Steve talked about some assets being countable, some not being countable. He talked about us having public policy for various purposes. One of those purposes is we don't want to impoverish the well spouse, right? So if you're married and one person needs care, we don't want to spend both of you down to $2,000. If that's the case, the well spouse is going to have to go and apply for food stamps and Section 8 housing, right? That's not something that anyone really is intending. So, if a married couple has $250,000, half of that is going to have to get spent on care. The other half can be kept for the community spouse. So what we want to do is leverage how much money we put into that half. Additionally, after you qualify for Medicaid, the community spouse, the person who doesn't need the care, can inherit or win the lottery and still keep their spouse on Medicaid. So you end up having to do this. Down, and then you can go back up after you've qualified. There's also, when I said fair market value transfers get penalized typically, well, a transfer from a married spouse to the other spouse is not penalized either, right? So we can move assets around amongst a married couple. $250,000 was the maximum amount that we were going to get to protect about half of your assets if you're married. The actual term is $252,840. But timing matters. So from the date someone goes into a facility, that is the day that Medicaid takes a resource assessment as to what both of you own.
Could you say that one more time?
From the day you go into a facility, that's the day that Medicaid says, what did you own? And we divide by half. The maximum amount you're going to get to keep is the half of the $250, $126,000. So I don't want you spending all the money and then applying for Medicaid, right? We want you to spend as little money as possible and then apply for Medicaid and then spend. Okay? The timing is important and it'll save $100,000 in many cases. There is also a special rule about your income. The community spouse, the person living in the house, the person not receiving the institutional care, gets to keep at least $2,058 per month. If they don't make enough money on their own income, we can reach over to the ill spouse's income and move however much we need to get to that $2,000 threshold. So if the well spouse is living at the house and her income is $500 and the ill spouse is in the facility, we can move $1,500 over every single month to the community spouse to keep them in the house. These are all kinds of protections we want to look at when we're looking at doing a Medicaid application. So thank you very much for listening to me. You have
Good job. When I was sitting in the back, I realized how hard it is to see some of these numbers. And I just want to hit a couple of the main things here, and that's how much money he saved. These were both crisis cases.
Yeah.
So in the second case, Sonny and Cher, because they were married, he had more options. He saved $1 million.
Yeah.
Which was basically 99%. We talked about saving half. It just so happened in this case, which makes it a good reason we're sharing it, because we did a really great job. He saved close to $1 million. On the other case, I was just looking at it, there was $378,000 of total assets. And when it was done, they had to spend $118,000, which $118,000 is a lot of money, but so is $260,000 that he saved. Just using the laws, folks. So I think that's the important thing to take away from here, is there's options. And people are unaware of them. That's the reason we're doing these workshops. So please spread the word. People don't have to go completely broke. Okay? Just, you got to know the laws in order to use them, though. That concludes our presentation. If you signed up, is there anybody out here on a row that the clipboard did not make it down your row yet? Okay, good. Just real quick, whenever we do these, and we'll do another one in the morning, we'll get booked out a couple of months, as you can imagine. So we're going to give you a call here, if not tomorrow, the first of the week. We're going to, for those of you who have a family member in a crisis situation, try to get you in first. But some of you, it might be 2 or 3 weeks before we can get you in. Just appreciate you being patient. We'll get you in. We'll give you a call and figure out what works for you. And I look forward to seeing you in the office. So thank you so much for coming. You guys be careful going home. Thank you for attending this virtual workshop. If you know someone who could benefit from this information, please feel free to share this video link with them. Also, if you found this information helpful and that it might benefit you personally or someone that you know in your family, please give us a call and let's schedule a free consultation for you to come in, get to know us, and let us hear a little bit about whether or not we can help you. Thank you.